My story of the ritual that we all performed that night doesn't start there. It starts back, way farther back. See, I first met Mitchell and Jennifer at Burning Man back in 2011. I had traveled there to see what it was like. That's all I was about back then, seeing what life had to offer. I had escaped from a very restrictive religious household and family when I was 17. So for the next 10 years after that, I traveled, explored myself and society, and enlightened myself. That's what led me to Burning Man that year, and Mitchell and Jennifer were of the same mind, so I guess that's why we connected so well. Like, on my second night at the festival, there I am in their tent, sitting with Mitch with his lanky body and shaggy shoulder-length hair, and Jen, just as skinny with long raven black hair and dark brown eyes, smoking cigarettes, just talking about everything. Life, the universe, everything.
See, what I think,
Mitchell said, taking a drag off his cigarette,
is that there's so many lines drawn between everything, you know?
Jennifer started nodding vigorously in silent agreement with him as he said this, and as I tried to grasp what he was getting at.
Like,
he continued, gesturing with his hands.
There's all this division. I don't like that, and neither does Jennifer. We believe in breaking down the walls and lines between us. We're all a human family, and we should all live like it. If someone's gay, or they're poly, or asexual, or whatever, who cares? They're human, and that's what matters. They deserve to be treated with respect, and I'll fight anyone who thinks different. I mean, that's a big reason why we're both socialists. The inherent emphasis on the dignity of the human being, no matter what.
When he finished, Jennifer murmured a, "Love you, babe," and leaned over to peck him on the mouth. Honestly, I was in love with everything he was saying. It was so refreshing to me, having come from the background that I did. I let out a chuckle and nodded vigorously. I feel you, completely. I've seen what restrictive and narrow-minded mindsets can do to people, and I can't stand against them hard enough. Jen and Mitch's eyes and smiles widened a tad in that I think we found a kindred spirit way. That was just the beginning, but as we spent more time together throughout the entire festival, a real friendship was forged into being. Anyways, fast forward to 2014, the year we performed the ritual, and everything changed for the worst. By this time, we were all living in Vancouver. Jen and Mitch were living together and working together at a leftist bookstore downtown. Me? I was working as a graphic designer for a major firm headquartered on Burrard Street, aka the business district, as I called it. I mean, pretty bougie, yeah, but it paid the bills and I loved doing it. I was always a deeply artistic person, even as a youth. So I'd gotten out of work early Friday afternoon and decided to drop by the bookstore to see Jen and Mitch and see what our plans for the weekend would be. It was a warm and sunny day and everything was shining. Vancouver didn't come off as cold and gray like it usually did, but rather there was this glowing yellow brightness to everything. Sometimes I wonder if I just decided to not go there that day, if I just decided to go home and not talk to Jen and Mitch that weekend, which happened sometimes as I got busy with work or just needed alone time. If things would have been different, then I stopped myself because running what-ifs like that through your mind will only hurt you and drive you insane. I approached the bookstore, a neat-looking little storefront with 2 wide glass windows showcasing their featured books. From the looks of it, some David Harvey books along with Zinn and Chomsky. I opened the door and stepped in. The interior of the bookstore was this huge open space, but it really didn't seem like it because every wall was packed with bookshelves, with more bookshelves filling the bookstore and stacks of books all over the floor. Basically, it was every book nerd's dream. I stepped inside and peered around, finally spotting Jen ringing through a transaction. She finished as I approached, and as she spotted me, her eyes lit up and she came rushing over to me, a big smile on her face. "Adam!" she happily exclaimed, embracing me in a tight hug. "Hey Jen, is Mitch around?" I asked, looking back and forth to see if I could spot him. She shook her head. "He's out dealing with an order, but," she shot out, her smile getting even wider, I have the best idea for what the three of us could all do over the weekend. I raised my eyebrows and stuttered out a, okay, sure, since that was exactly what I'd come by to check about. Okay, she said excitedly, gesturing with her hands. Mitchell got this summoning ritual from this friend of his over the internet. We perform the ritual to summon a spirit and invite it into our beings, mind, heart, and body, to commune with it on a deep level. I nodded slowly to indicate I was following along with what she was saying. I wasn't surprised. She was always into various forms of spirituality, not organized religion at all, but spirituality, sure. It wasn't quite Mitch's thing, but he loved seeing how passionate she would get about it, because he loved her. It wasn't quite my thing either, but I thought it was interesting, at least. So I finally said, sure, sounds great, sign me up. Just call me when you want me to come over, okay? Jen nodded vigorously, a huge smile still on her face. At that moment, her boss called her over, and she said, Look, I gotta go, but I'll call you and I'll tell Mitchell you dropped by. Her tone apologetic. I smiled and nodded in acknowledgement, and she turned around to hurry back to what her boss was calling her over for. Long story short, the next evening I was on the floor of Jen and Mitch's bedroom at their place, a cozy little one-bedroom apartment in one of the more affordable parts of town. Our hands linked together, we were within a circle that had been drawn around us on the wooden floor in chalk, with various occult symbols drawn inside of it. There were 6 candles lit all around us, and a bowl of clear water in the center of the circle we were sitting in. We'd already performed most of the ritual, and what remained was, well, it kind of skeeved me out, but like I said, I always try to be open-minded. It's one of those things I pride myself on. Jen released my hand and Mitch's hand and picked up a knife laying before her. Holding her hand over the bowl, she slowly cut a lengthy line into her palm and, turning over her palm, bled into the bowl. I watched as the blood ran into the water, turning it a murky red. As the blood spread throughout the murky water, Jen spoke the final words of the ritual, the part of the instructions called the prayer. Blood to blood we call thee to thyself. We invite thee into our whole being. Come, O blessed, come. When she was finished, she quickly pulled her hand back, wrapped it in gauze, and then we waited, and waited, and waited. We ended up waiting for 40 minutes and nothing happened. Mitch was the first to break the silence.
Sweetheart, looks like it might have just been a dud,
he said apologetically, his face adopting a I'm sorry kind of look. Jen, her face looking glum, nodded. Yeah, I guess it was just something made up. I was really hoping, you know? She said, looking at both me and Mitch, a sad expression on her face. With that, we cleaned everything up, had some pizza, and watched a movie. And then I headed home at the end of the night. The first strange things that started to happen occurred a week later. Jen invited me over for a Yes, Prime Minister marathon. They loved British comedy. So I go over, and right away I noticed something wrong with Mitch. When he greeted me, his eyes were wide open, like he was wired on something. Now, that was weird because one thing about Jen and Mitch, they were 100% drug-free. They didn't want their minds being influenced by that kind of stuff. Not only that, he was twitching all over. His eyes, his arms, his hands. It was weird. Hey, buddy, you okay? I tentatively asked, and he reacted. He snapped at me that he was fine, and with that, turned around and hurried into the living room. I followed and, not wanting to push the matter, let it lie. So we're watching the show and God, it was just so weird. Midway through the marathon, he starts sobbing his eyes out, his eyes wide, staring at the TV screen. Then he starts gnawing on his hand. At that point, I nudged Jen. Jen, what the hell is wrong with Mitch? I asked, a concerned look on my face. She looked at him, then back at me with a very confused look on her face. He's fine, she said, somewhat indignantly, as if I was being rude. I tried to press the matter, but the way she looked at me, I knew she didn't want to hear it. I stayed there for another half hour, and in the end, I left. I couldn't take being around all that. It was too surreal. The entire time I stayed, and then after I left, my mind kept going back to that ritual we performed. As I traveled back to my place on transit, my mind ran all over the crazy possibility that the ritual had worked. Like, I don't know. It was crazy as hell, but it seemed too coincidental. Mitch and Jen never would have ingested any narcotics. I knew that much for sure. And they had never, in the 3 years I'd known them, acted like that. And if it was something like mental instability, why had Jen not noticed? That's what got me, and had me entertaining the possibility that we'd summoned some malevolent force from beyond. But as I couldn't quite make sense of it, I decided to sleep on it. When I got home, I found myself getting a killer headache. It got bad enough that I had to stop and lean on my kitchen counter. I figured it was just, I don't know, me getting sick or something, so I popped a couple Tylenols and that was that. Then I went to bed. That night, I dreamed that I was in this dark, empty void of nothingness. Not floating, just standing on this dark, invisible floor, surrounded by nothing. But in the dream, I knew I was being watched. And then, almost as if on schedule, right in front of me, 2 giant eyes, as if part of a giant invisible face, blinked open, staring directly at me. I woke up, my heart pounding. What was that? It wasn't even really scary, but it still bugged me a lot for some reason. It was about that time that I realized I was laying on the kitchen floor. Looking around and cautiously picking myself up off the floor, I tried to work out how I'd gotten there, and then it clicked. Sleepwalking. I'd had a problem with sleepwalking when I was a kid, so this must have been it reoccurring. Kind of weird, but whatever. I'd see a doctor about it in the next couple of days. But on my way back to bed, my cell started ringing on my bedstand. I picked it up and saw that the call was from Jen. I picked it up and right away, her sobbing voice could be heard through the speaker. Adam, oh God, she said, her whispered voice punctuated by sobs. Please, you need to come over. Mitchell, he's... And then her voice rising into a scream. Oh my God! And then the line went dead. That was it. That did it. I got dressed as quickly as I could and caught a cab over there. Following someone into the building who was walking in as I walked up, I quickly made my way to their apartment. As I approached their door, I could hear Jen screaming and loud banging and crashing noises coming from inside. Preparing myself for anything, I opened the unlocked door and raced in. There, in the living room, with a video camera on the mantle recording everything, was Mitch standing over Jen's body and her bruised, crying, terrified face with a knife. His shirt was off and I could see self-inflicted wounds all over, still bloody. He turned and looked at me, a crazed look in his eye. I knew I had to act. I knew I had to, so I ran at him. He swung the knife at me, but I ducked and grabbed the wrist holding it. I tried to wrestle him to the ground as Jen's hard, scared sobs filled the room, but he was strong. He had a strength I'd never conceived he could have had. He drove me against the wall, smashing me into it, but I fought dirty. I smashed my forehead against his nose, causing him to stumble backwards as he yelped in pain, dropping the knife. I thought that gave me the upper hand, but he ran against me, driving me into the wall again, the pictures hanging on it clattering to the ground. We struggled for what seemed like an eternity before I managed to trip him and get him on the ground. But he wouldn't give up. He kept moving all over, struggling with every ounce of strength. He was fighting like a madman. I had to do what I did. I grabbed his head, gripping it with both hands, feeling my fingers tight and warm against his skull. The flesh squeezed between my fingertips and his skull. With him struggling beneath me, I lifted his head and, my heart pounding in sheer terror and angst, and tears running down my face, smashed it into the ground. Hard. Immediately after I did that, he went still. Panting hard, tears in my eyes, I looked over at Jen to see if she was okay, and I saw her. I saw her lying there still, her body covered in blood, stab wounds all over. I stared at her in shock, my heart pounding. The blood was slick and wet, covering the entire half of the floor she was on. The stab wounds were clear and visible, looking like raw meat that had been butchered in the meat department of a grocery store. Anxious and scared, I yelled her name. Jen! I didn't know what the hell was going on. She was just fine minutes ago. What the hell happened? I got up to walk over to her, but almost immediately tumbled over as I blacked out. I woke up in a hospital bed, handcuffed to the bed. As I groggily blinked my eyes, the nurse attending to me hurried out and returned with 2 uniformed officers of the RCMP, or Royal Canadian Mounted Police, a tall, thin one and a short, stocky one. They looked at me like they hated me, this cold, icy look in their eyes.
Mr. Livington, are you feeling better?
The thin one asked. I nodded slowly, still confused. Yeah, I am. Why am I handcuffed to the bed?
I'm Sergeant Brockman, and this is Corporal Phillips,
the thin one said, motioning to himself and his partner. Still that cold, icy look. What happened? I immediately asked.
Sir, we need to ask you some questions first,
Brockman said before I could cut him off. What the hell is going on? Where's Jen? What happened to her? I shot out, angry, my voice rising. Why were these people messing with me like this? I wanted to know what was going on, what had happened. At this, the officer's eyes widened in a look of surprise, and they glanced at each other. Brockman whispered something to Phillips, and then they looked back at me.
Mr. Livington, I think you should see this and tell us how you can explain it all,
Brockman said, pulling out his phone, tapping the screen a bit, and then playing a video for me. The video was time-stamped as being around the time I found Mitch about to murder Jen. Only, they weren't fighting at all. They were sitting on the couch together, cuddled up and smiling into the camera. Jen started talking about how she and Mitch were doing and what their plans for the future were, and more. It soon became apparent that this was a video message to her parents. And then I came into view. I walked between them and the camera, a knife gripped in my hand. Mitch and Jen's eyes went wide with fear, with Mitch holding his hands out and asking me, very calm, to put the knife down. And I responded by jamming the knife into his neck. In the video, I was moving quickly and forcefully, as if I really meant to do what I was doing. So fast it seemed, like I was in a craze, I idly thought as I watched in a kind of stupor. Blood was spurting everywhere, and Jen scrambled backwards, screaming. Then I ripped the knife out and grabbed her arm, and then, throwing her to the ground, exactly in the spot where I saw her dead body lying that last night, I crawled on top of her, straddling her body, and, lifting the knife high, and then bringing it down fast, I drove it into her, over and over. I don't want to describe the rest. I can't. But the video showed me viciously, brutally murdering my closest friends. And then, after I was finished, I collapsed to the ground, unconscious. I looked up, wild-eyed at the officers. I tried to explain what happened, that I didn't remember any of that. I explained what I did remember, but I could tell, even before I finished, that they didn't believe me, that they wouldn't, they couldn't. It didn't make any sense. Long story short, I was charged with first-degree murder. It became a very well-publicized case. The court shrink examined me, found me mentally competent, and I was found guilty. Life without the possibility of parole for 25 years. Ever since then, I've thought so hard about what happened. I know now that something did answer our call that night, and it changed how I saw things, changed how I perceived things, made me see Mitch acting strange, and then all of that other stuff when none of it was happening. And the worst part is, I think it did it just to toy with us, with me, to have fun. I don't have internet access, so I'm relaying this to my brother to post it for me on the internet. I just need to say my piece, to present my side of things, because it needs to be said, even if no one will ever believe me. I owe Mitchell and Jennifer that much.